Hello everyone, Cade from the Legends Library here, and over the Labor Day weekend, the question was posed to me by one of my friends. How should I get into the expanded universe? You've been talking about it for so many years, and finally I'm ready to get into it. I gave him my recommendations because I knew stuff that he likes and doesn't like. So that gave me the inspiration to make this video for more of a general overview of what some people could read, play, etc. to get into the expanded universe. So without further ado, let's get started. Starting off my list will be the jumping off point that many people had into the expanded universe, and that being, of course, the Thrawn Trilogy, written by Timothy Zahn. Now, this trilogy is masterfully written and includes amazing characterization for the returning characters and really gets you attached to the characters that are introduced for these novels, many of which continued into the expanded universe far down the line. Another great point for the trilogy is that all you need to enjoy it are episodes 4, 5, and 6. You don't need a lot of background information from the expanded universe. All you need to really know is that the Empire was severely weakened at the end of episode 6, but not outright defeated, and that the Rebellion, now New Republic, has been fighting against them this entire time. Another awesome point to this trilogy is that all you need for prior experience is episodes 4, 5, and 6. You don't need any prior expanded universe reading, and the only knowledge you really need is that at the end of episode 6, the Empire, with the death of the Emperor and the defeat of the fleet above Endor, majorly crippled the Empire, and they've been fighting a losing battle ever since. And to loop back to the characters, this trilogy introduced some of the most fan-favorite, exclusive to the expanded universe characters. Characters like Mara Jade, Thrawn, of course, the character who the trilogy is named after, Talon Karrde, and my personal favorite Imperial, Gilad Pellaeon. Now, the only thing that really keeps this trilogy lower on the list, and in fact starting off my list, is the fact that everybody recommends this, so odds are if you're watching this video, you've probably heard someone say, read the Thrawn Trilogy. There is also a small little continuity error that was later retconned as to what the Clone Wars actually were, because at this time of the expanded universe, writing anything before the original trilogy was highly off limits, and only a few novels even took place before the original trilogy. And I don't at this point think even George Lucas knew what the Clone Wars were. So in that way, it gets a pass. Also, they fix it later in a comic book. So it's very, very small, and it shouldn't take away from your enjoyment of these novels. Next up is the Jedi Academy Trilogy and Jedi Academy video game. The two aren't really related, and the video game doesn't reference, I think, hardly at all, the events of the Jedi Academy trilogy. Now, for the trilogy, I initially went back to reread it because I didn't care for the portrayal of Luke in the sequels. So I wanted something where I knew Luke Skywalker was acting how I think that Luke Skywalker should act, and many fans do as well. And that's, he creates the Jedi Paraxium on Yavin 4, and trains more Jedi, and it doesn't all fall apart within 30 years. The series also expands on the new Jedi Order that he creates, and has very fun to read action scenes, and an awesome insight into the new Jedi Order, which of course would be later expanded upon itself. Over to the video game, Tristan and I did a full-length podcast on our feelings about the Jedi Academy video game. And what I can, of course, say, and what I'm pretty sure most people would agree with, is this video game has the best lightsaber combat of any Star Wars video game. And the story is a little bit silly, and the voice acting is a little bit cheesy at times. I think that video games are the perfect medium to express these more silly, fun stories. And by no means is it bad, and it does have a lot of cool references to the expanded universe. You get to visit the ruins of the planet Biss, Marco Ragnos is fairly heavily involved in the plot, and of course it is a sequel to the Jedi Outcast game, which Kyle Katarn is featured in. He's also featured in this game, as well as some returning characters from that game. Now, I'm also a little bit biased because when I was a kid, I played this game all the time and was blown away by the very limited at the time now character creation. I was enthralled with the idea of making my own Jedi, and the ability to get to automatically have a green lightsaber, my personal favorite, was amazing. As said before, the saber combat is so satisfying to do, and the force powers are very, very fun as well. So I would definitely give this game a try, as well as reading the Jedi Academy Trilogy. Now moving along, if you're one of our, I believe it's now 14 subscribers to this channel, you will know that Tristan and I are doing an overview/review of the Star Wars Legacy series. This would of course be the next thing on my list that could get you into the expanded universe. And again, I'm a little biased because this is my personal favorite Star Wars comic book series. But like the Thrawn trilogy, you don't need a lot of background info to really read this comic series. Yes, some things are referenced, but it takes place so far after them that it isn't that important, and they really do set up the universe at the beginning of the comic series, as mentioned in the full-length podcast about them, that you really don't need a lot of background. And the characters that are mentioned are either in passing, so it's not that important, or not exactly important to the plot, so if you don't quite understand a reference, it isn't a big deal. The art is also amazing, and the story is very, very fun to read, with one of my personal favorite Star Wars protagonists, Cade. I share a name with him, Skywalker. And his entire crew are very fun to read. The interactions between them all, they feel very realistic and well written. The series also has my personal favorite Sith Order, being the one Sith led by my personal favorite Sith, Darth Krayt. And if I had to say anything else about it, if you're looking for something that's a bit more, and I hate this term because it gets thrown around too much, dark and gritty, then this might be one for you. Next up on the list are two video games because they're a duology, and I will probably have an aneurysm if you try and make me pick which one is actually my favorite. It's a tie, it's cheating, but it's of course Knights of the Old Republic 1 and Knights of the Old Republic 2. I'm very biased because I played them a lot when I was a kid, and even though I sucked at them probably until I was 11 or 12, the story was so engrossing that I had to push through the gameplay, which I thought was very difficult, but it's just because I didn't know how to set up an RPG character properly, that I found myself going back to it. And Knights of the Old Republic 1 has a far simpler story of more or less the Star Wars good versus evil. Or, if you choose the dark side, Satan versus also Satan. And it's very, very fun. The companions in both games are amazing. Standouts to me from the first game, of course, Jolee Bindo for sure. I really like Karth, even though he gets kind of typecast, I guess, as a whiny character. Bastila is also very fun to interact with, as well as Zalbar. I really liked having this Wookiee companion, and he's not like the most dynamic character, but his little subplot on Kashyyyk is very awesome, and he's an awesome Wookiee. Probably my favorite Wookiee. And that's going to be a very unpopular opinion. But moving on to Knights of the Old Republic 2, it does, for lack of a better term, and I also think this term gets thrown around a little too much, it's a bit more morally gray. The main antagonist isn't like super duper evil, although the end goal of the antagonist is kind of evil, I think. But it does bring up very interesting views on the Force, on the Jedi, on the Sith, on the Star Wars galaxy as a whole. The gameplay is much improved from Knights of the Old Republic 1. It's a bit more in-depth, but eventually it does become very easy if you know the correct things to do. You can get a lot of Force powers and a lot of Force points, which make the game very easy depending on which ones you pick. But that doesn't mean it's bad by any means. The story is superb and one of the best in all of Star Wars. The companions in this game, in my opinion, are an improvement. Kreia, of course, being the standout, but they also added some very fun characterization to the droids into T3M4, and of course everyone's favorite assassin droid, HK-47. I also really like Atton Rand, and he's probably my second favorite companion. I just like how he's kind of the anti-Han Solo, where he is kind of very cowardly and envious and all of that stuff, and he's just a very, very fun character to interact with as well. The game also, besides having such fun companions, adds a lot to the character of Revan. and adds very unique twists to his story. And those, of course, were later completely nullified by the Old Republic MMO, but I won't get into that here. The characterization of Revan in this video game is superb, and it's all told through people who knew him, which makes it very, very interesting. I won't get into the details so you can experience it for yourself, but I would definitely recommend playing both of these games. I believe they're both compatible, backwards compatible, on the Xbox One, but I would recommend playing them on Steam if you can. They should both be fairly cheap. And when you play Knights of the Old Republic 2, if you do play it on a computer, I would recommend getting the restored content mod. It restores most of the content that had to be cut from the game because LucasArts wanted the game to come out for Christmas, and so the devs had to cut a lot of very, very cool and interesting content. And if you can play it with all that stuff, it goes from A- to A+. Knights of the Old Republic 1, A+, you don't need any mods for it. It's an awesome game, and I would, of course, recommend them to anyone who's a fan of Star Wars, not just trying to get into the expanded universe. And keeping in the Old Republic kind of era, I would, of course, recommend the Darth Bane Trilogy. I would prefer you read this after you play Knights of the Old Republic 1 and 2, because it does reference a few things in that, but as a standalone trilogy, you could definitely read it only having watched the 6 movies. It, of course, tells the story of Darth Bane, who actually was first referenced in the Episode 1 novelization. And the Rule of Two, of course, is a very big part of the prequel trilogy. And this shows how the Rule of Two came to be. Darth Bane is an awesome and fun character to read. His descent down the dark path is told right from the start and is very believable in the time period. And we also do get a bit of a different Order of the Sith in the Brotherhood of Darkness, which I really enjoy reading, and I think they're very cool. You get some very cool side characters like Lord Khan, the leader of the Brotherhood of Darkness, Kasim, a lightsaber instructor in the first book, Githany, also in the first book. The first book is the best one out of the trilogy, in my opinion. The second book is amazing, and the third book, while not as good as the other two for, in my opinion, cosmic coincidences, is still a pretty good read. If you're interested at all in the Sith or Sith history, or just kind of a fan of the dark side in general, I would definitely recommend these because you get a Sith protagonist, and it makes you feel and root for a villain whose goal is to take over the galaxy and destroy the Jedi Order. That's not how it should work, but it does. He's superbly written. And the characters on the light side, also very, very fun to read. But again, some of the characters in the third book do definitely lag behind the first and second novels. But regardless, I would recommend these, and these could be a very good launching point to getting into more different Sith stuff in the expanded universe. And to finish the list off, to kind of get something from the prequels in there, I'm not a huge fan of the prequel era. I much prefer post-Return of the Jedi and the Old Republic eras myself, prequels being a obviously close third because there are a lot of good stories to tell here. But a lot of them do reference and build off of previous expanded universe stuff that happened, and the ones I like are kind of those stories. But one novel I would recommend to anyone, expanded universe fan or not, but if you're trying to get into the expanded universe and you're a big fan of the prequel era, I would recommend to no end the Episode 3 novelization. And you're probably thinking, well, why would I read that? I know what happens. That's true, but this novel adds so much to the movie, and it makes the movie even better, because I know Episode 3 is a lot of people's favorite movies, and this novel only improves it. And while there are some references to previous expanded universe things, this isn't wholly built off of previous works. And the characterizations of Palpatine and Anakin, and even Grievous and Dooku only being in the first 20 or so minutes of the movie. The inner monologues that some of these characters have, they're nigh on Shakespearean, and they're amazing. And some of the scenes, especially if you listen to the audiobook with the full music and sound effects, are chill-inducing, and even reading them are superbly, amazingly written. And words can't express how much I love this novelization. Even if you've seen the movie 100 billion times, I would go out and I would find a copy of this novel, especially if you're a fan of the prequel era. Now, a couple honorable mentions and things you could read once you get a bit more of a start and have read some things. Darth Plagueis would be on here. It does reference, I think, a little too many things in the expanded universe and make them plot points for someone who hasn't read or gotten into the expanded universe yet to really read. But after you've read a couple things, I would definitely recommend it. Yoda Dark Rendezvous, again, an awesome prequel novel, but in my opinion, doesn't work as well as a standalone. Same thing with Labyrinth of Evil, which is a prequel to Episode 3. I think those are some very good prequel stories, but they do build a bit too much, in my opinion, for someone who's never read or just gotten into the expanded universe to read. So after you've gotten through, some stuff in that era, I would definitely give them a read. Some other stuff in the prequel era that you might really like, but I'm not a fan of, would definitely be the Republic Commando series. Me personally, I've never been a huge fan of clones or kind of the Clone Wars, but if you're a fan of clones or the Clone Wars or the prequel era, then I would recommend those to you, but me personally, they're just not for me. And also in regards to post-Return of the Jedi, it does pay me to leave the New Jedi Order series off this list, but that's not something that should be your first expanded universe series. It's 19 books long and does build a lot on the Bantam era Star Wars universe post-Return of the Jedi. And I don't think you could jump right into them. If you want to, by all means, but I would recommend reading perhaps the Thrawn Trilogy and Thrawn Duology first at least. But regardless, guys, that does it for my list, and a couple honorable mentions and maybe some recommendations for you once you've gotten a bit of a start. But, tell me below, what got you into the expanded universe? Was it one of the novels, a video game, a comic book? I would really like to hear it. And unfortunately, I didn't put a lot of the comic book series on here because, to be 100% honest, I just really haven't read a lot of them. But that does do it for me here. Be sure to check out the channel for future updates and more videos as we're continuing along. At the time of recording this, we're about halfway through the Legacy series in our full-length podcast, and I will be putting out more short stuff like this in the future as well. So until I see you next time, have a great day, and may the Force be with you.